Good day, students. How are you? I hope you're okay and you're ready for our today's lesson. Today we are going to have an interesting lesson by home reading. And how do you think? What are we going to talk about? Yeah, from this picture, you can guess that we're going to talk about the ant and the grasshopper. And how do you think? What is it? Is it a story or fairy tale? Yeah, this is a fable which was written by Jean de La Fontaine. And today we are going to talk about the short story with the same title but which was written by William Thomas Moore. And our today's aim of our today's lesson is to teach students to analyze the situation a short story based on and to find details which shows the author's attitude to the behavior of his characters. And now we will have some information about the author of the short story. William Thomas Moore was an English playwright, novelist and short story writer who was born in 1874 in Paris, in France. He was his mother was a writer and his father was a lawyer at the British Embassy. He was the fourth child in his family and of 7 children, and only 4 of them survived infancy. His elder brothers, Charles, Frederick and Henry, studied at the boarding school in England. When William was 8 years old, his mother died from tuberculosis, and at the age of 10, he lost his father, who died from cancer. William had a medical education too. In 1897, his first novel, Liz of Lambeth, was published. And he had also a lot of famous novels, short stories, essays, and the short story which we are going to talk about is The Ant and Grasshopper. This story bases itself on the well-known fable of La Fontaine. And in a fable, the main characters are the ant and grasshopper. But in a More's story, the main characters are 2 brothers, George and Tom. And now we will watch a video about this story. But before watching, I want to do this activity. Now you should, we have some of adjectives and you should match these adjectives with their characters. You should divide these adjectives into 2 columns. Okay, if you have finished, now we will watch a video about 2 brothers.
20 years. He had begun life decently enough. He went into business, married and had 2 children. The Ramsays were perfectly respectable people and there was every reason to suppose that Tom Ramsay would have a useful and honorable career. But one day, without warning, he announced that he didn't like work and that he was not suited for marriage. He wanted to enjoy himself. He would listen to no expostulations. He left his wife and his office. He had a little money and spent 2 happy years in the various capitals of Europe. Rumors of his doings reached his relations from time to time, and they were profoundly shocked. He certainly had a very good time. They shook their heads and asked what would happen when his money was spent. They soon found out he borrowed. He was charming and unscrupulous. I have never met anyone to whom it was more difficult to refuse a loan. He made a steady income from his friends and he made friends easily. But he always said that the money you spent on necessities was boring. The money that was amusing to spend was the money you spent on luxuries. For this, he depended on his brother, George. He did not waste his charm on him. George was a serious man and insensible to such enticements. George was respectable. Once or twice, he fell to Tom's promises of amendment and gave him considerable sums in order that he might make a fresh start. On these, Tom bought a motor car and some very nice jewelry. But when circumstances forced George to realize that his brother would never settle down and he washed his hands of him, Tom, without a qualm, began to blackmail him. It was not very nice for a respectable lawyer to find his brother shaking cocktails behind the bar of his favorite restaurant, or to see him waiting on the box seat of a taxi outside his club. Tom said that to serve in a bar or to drive a taxi was a perfectly decent occupation, but if George could oblige him with a couple of £100, he didn't mind for the honor of the family giving it up. George paid. Once Tom nearly went to prison. George was terribly upset. He went into the whole discreditable affair. Really, Tom had gone too far. He had been wild, thoughtless and selfish. But he had never before done anything dishonest by which George meant illegal. And if he were prosecuted, he would assuredly be convicted. But you cannot allow your only brother to go to jail. The man Tom had cheated, a man called Cronshaw, was vindictive. He was determined to take the matter into court. He said that Tom was a scoundrel and should be punished. It cost George an infinite deal of trouble and £500 to settle the affair. I have never seen him in such a rage as when he heard that Tom and Cronshaw had gone off together to Monte Carlo the moment they cashed the check. They spent a happy month there. For 20 years, Tom raced and gambled, philandered with the prettiest girls, danced, ate in the most expensive restaurants, and dressed beautifully. He always looked as if he had just stepped out of a bandbox. Though he was 46, you would never have taken him for more than 35. He was a most amusing companion, and though you knew he was perfectly worthless, you could not but enjoy his society. He had high spirits, an unfailing gaiety, and incredible charm. I never grudged the contributions he regularly levied on me for the necessities of his existence. I never lent him £50 without feeling that I was in his debt. Tom Ramsay knew everyone, and everyone knew Tom Ramsay. You could not approve of him, but you could not help liking him. Poor George, only a year older than his scapegrace brother, looked 60. He had never taken more than a fortnight's holiday in the year. For a quarter of a century, he was in his office every morning at 9:30 and never left it till 6. He was honest, industrious, and worthy. He had a good wife, to whom he had never been unfaithful even in thought, and 4 daughters to whom he was the best of fathers. He made a point of saving a third of his income, and his plan was to retire at 55 to a little house in the country, where he proposed to cultivate his garden and play golf. His life was blameless. He was glad that he was growing old, because Tom was growing old too. He rubbed his hands and said, "It was all very well when Tom was young and good-looking, but he's only a year younger than I am. In 4 years, he'll be 50. He won't find life so easy then. I shall have £30,000 by the time I'm 50. For 25 years, I've said that Tom would end in the gutter, and we shall see how he likes that. We shall see if it really pays best to work or be idle." Poor George. I sympathized with him. I wondered now, as I sat down beside him, what infamous thing Tom had done. George was evidently very much upset. "Do you know what's happened now?" he asked me. I was prepared for the worst. I wondered if Tom had got into the hands of the police at last. George could hardly bring himself to speak. "You're not going to deny that all my life I've been hard-working, decent, respectable and straightforward. After a life of industry and thrift, I can look forward to retiring on small income in gilt-edged securities. I've always done my duty in that state of life in which it has pleased Providence to place me." True. And you can't deny that Tom had been an idle, worthless, dissolute and dishonorable rogue. If there were any justice, he'd be in the workhouse. True. George grew red in the face. A few weeks ago, he became engaged to a woman old enough to be his mother, and now she's died and left him everything she had. £500,000, a yacht, a house in London and a house in the country. George Ramsay beat his clenched fist on the table. "It's not fair. I tell you, it's not fair. Damn it, it's not fair." I could not help it. I burst into a shout of laughter as I looked at George's wrathful face. I rolled in my chair. I very nearly fell on the floor. George never forgave me, but Tom often asked me to excellent dinners in his charming house in Mayfair, and if he occasionally borrows a trifle from me, that's merely from force of habit. It's never more than sovereign. Thank you.
Okay, you watch the video and now we will do this activity. In this activity, you have some statements with which you should agree or disagree. For example, if we take the first statement, John Ramsey was a decent lawyer respected by his colleagues and acquaintances. With these statements, we agree because in reality, Ramsey was a very hard-working, honest man and he was respected by his colleagues. And you should agree and disagree with other statements. Here we have an activity, a pyramid puzzle, and here you can see some numbers which were taken from the text. You should explain what these numbers mean. If we take the number 2, it means that this story about two brothers. Or if we take number 47, it means it's the George's real age. And here we have another activity, quintiline questions. Here we have 7 question words. You should at first ask questions and answer them using the story. If we take the question who, we can ask question who were the main characters of the story. The main characters of the story, George and Tom. What? We can ask the question, what was George? George was a lawyer. Or next question, where? Where has been Tom? Tom has been in various capitals of Europe. Or if we take the question word how, we can ask question how old is Tom? Tom is 46. Like this, you should complete all these places. Okay, and our next task, you should give your opinion. Here we have 2 questions for what you should give answer and give reasons. Our lesson is over. Goodbye. And I hope that you get a lot of useful information for our today's lesson.